All right, hi guys. We have a pretty big day today, and I know I am not there, but I want you guys to watch this, pause it, rewind, go back, whatever you need to do to understand this. This is day one of us going from standard form to vertex form of a parabola. It can be challenging. It is used a lot next year in pre-calc, so it's definitely something that we need to know what's going on. Before we get into it, since part of it has to deal with these kinds of problems right here, I just want to review them a little bit. We talked last week about how to multiply these fairly quickly. If you remember, a lot of kids always forget that OI term. So if I just look at this first one, if I want to multiply these out or expand them so they don't have the square to them, I would have x squared and the 16. And if you remember, the way to get that inside the OI term, the OI, is to take this number and multiply it by 2. So I would have 4x and 4x if I wrote it out, if I had it actually expanded and shown. And so the quick and fast way is for us to just have taken that 4 and multiplied it by 2. So I would have x squared plus 8x plus 16. So I can do these other two really quickly if I just realize I'm going to take negative 3 and multiply it by 2. So I'm going to get negative 6x, and negative 3 squared is 9. And on the last one, I'm going to start off with x squared. I'm going to take 10 and multiply it by 2 to get 20x, and then 100 because I would do 10 squared, and I get plus 100. We are going to actually do this basically in reverse in order for us to do what we're going to do today. So let's get into it, right? What this method is called is to go from standard form to vertex form. So if you remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, and we're trying to go into y equals a, and then I have x minus h squared plus k. Right? And what this method is called is completing the square. So since we are trying to go in this direction, what I want to point out is that you actually have a square there. It's kind of like what I started. I'm going to flip back. It's what we started with in these. These are squares. They are the square of that binomial. So this is called completing the square. And it gets us from that standard form to vertex form. So what we want to do is realize that if I look at this equation, x squared plus 6x minus 7, okay? We're going to take this negative 7 and we're going to forget about it for a second. I'm going to put it all the way in the back, kind of get it out of place, out of mind. And we're going to only look at x squared plus 6x, okay? This is the beginning part of a square. This is the beginning part of x squared plus 6x plus a number right here. And that is going to make a square. Basically that, I'm going to flip back again, is going to be kind of our answer that we have when we actually go and multiply them together. So we're going to try to think about going backwards. And think about, well, remember this middle term is double the number in the square. So what we're going to do is take that number, which is 6 in this case. We are going to divide that 6 by 3. So understand that essentially we are trying to make this square, or complete this square, as the name says. We are going to try to make this square. The problem is, if I started to think about what x plus 3 squared would be, it would actually be x squared plus 6x, and this number here would be 9. You would take, this is double the number, and then this last one is the number squared. So it would actually take x squared plus 6x plus 9 to get x plus 3 squared. So if I'm trying to, here's the trick on this, if I'm trying to make this be an actual square, I am accidentally adding in a positive 9 right there. Okay? But we don't want to add a 9 to this equation. I still want the equation to be worth x squared plus 6x minus 7. So what we're going to have to do is balance the right side of the equation out. So I have this in two different colors for a reason. I have a plus 9 in here, and the thing is I don't want to really add any equality over onto this right-hand side of the equation. I want that to actually kind of be 0. So if I added 9 in the parentheses to make and complete this square, I actually have to balance out the rest of that right-hand side by subtracting 9. And if you notice, I'm going to highlight, if I were to add 9 and negative 9, they would basically cancel each other out. And if you take a look at really what I have left over, the green highlighted stuff is the original problem. And the 9 and the negative 9 really just add to 0. So I'm putting in this magic 9 here to get x plus 3 squared. And then these are like terms back here. I have negative 7 and negative 9, and those two add together to be negative 16. And believe it or not, in 2 steps, you are now in vertex form. You have a vertex x minus h plus k, x minus h squared plus k. We're going to try a couple more, don't worry. Okay? So, we are going to, here's a couple problems here. We're going to go through most of these just to make sure you have an idea of what's going on. We are going to take a look at just these first 2 terms because they're what's going to make this square. So I have x squared minus 18x. I'm going to forget about the 72 for a second. So I'm going to change colors so you can see this. Negative 18 is double the number. So negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. So this number right here is actually the square of negative 9, which is going to be plus 81. So if I'm going to add 81 there, I need to balance the equation off by subtracting 81 at the end. And now the equation, the red stuff adds to 0, so essentially you're still just the stuff I have in blue. So these 3 terms that I have up front, if you go backwards, you're going to end up with x minus 9 squared. It is the square in reverse. Then I'm going to take 72 minus 81, and I am going to get negative 9. So now, since we are in vertex form, it only really takes 2 steps to get there. It's just a little bit of thinking in those 2 steps. Now that I have my vertex form, I can state that my vertex is 9, negative 9. All right? So, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to look at these first 2 terms. I am going to try to make a square out of those. So I have x squared plus 8x, and I'm going to leave a blank, and I'm going to forget about the 3 for a second. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. So this number here is what 4 squared is. 4 squared is 16. If I'm going to balance out this equation, I have plus 16 here. I need to subtract 16 at the end. So these 3 terms make the square, and that square happens to be x plus 4. And 3 minus 16 is negative 13. So now that I am in vertex form, I have a vertex of negative 4, negative 13. All right, moving on. I'll try to save, actually I might not do all of these just to save some really lengthy video. All right, now I only did both of those were evens. I'll do one more with an even number in the middle. That helps out a little bit. So if I take the first 2 terms, and I have x squared minus 10x, I forget about the minus 9 for a second. I'm going to have negative 10. That is double your number. So negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. I am going to square negative 5, and I'm going to add 25. And to balance my equation out, I'm going to also subtract 25. So these 3 terms make the square. Our square is x minus 5 squared. And minus 9 minus 25 ends up being minus 34. So the square is, sorry, the vertex is 5, negative 34. Okay, we're going to skip this one. I'm trying not to make this super long for you guys, but I want to get into what happens when you have an even, I'm sorry, we had even numbers. Now what happens if I have an odd number in the front? Because that kind of changes things a little. Not changes things, it just makes it harder because it's not divisible by 2 perfectly. You got to do some fractions, which can be tricky. So if I take a look at these first two terms, I have x squared minus 7x. I'm going to forget about the 2. All right, so I really actually think that you guys should think about fractions and not decimals. It'll actually make it easier to square things. So if I take 7 and I divide it by 2, I understand that my square is 7 divided by 2. Keep it as 7 divided by 2. Don't make it a decimal. I think your life will be easier. So that's actually the square. Now, to get this number that I have to add, I would take my 7 halves and I would square it. Well, if I'm going to square 7 halves, I can square them separately. I can square 7 and get 49, and I can square 2 and get 4. Much easier to work with fractions like that. So if I have 49 over 4 that I added in the top part, I need to subtract 49 out of 4 to balance out the equation. So I realize that my square is x minus 7 halves. Now I just need to combine these two things together. Now they don't have the same denominator, so I can't quite add them yet. But if I have a denominator 4, what I want to do is take this whole number of 2, and I want to make it have a fraction of 4. So basically, if I take 4 over 4, I'm going to get 8 over 4. So I'm going to have 8 fourths minus 49 fourths, and I'm going to get minus 41 fourths. So my vertex is 7 over 2 and minus 41 over 4. It is actually much easier to deal with fractions rather than decimals in this case. It'll take a little bit of getting used to for some of you. All right, one last one, and then I'll let you guys start on your worksheet here. If I take this problem, and I have x squared plus 5x, you notice that 5 is an odd number. Not going to divide by 2 very cleanly for us. Forget about the 7 for right now. What I'm going to do is, sometimes I think it's helpful to think about what your square would be. It helps you kind of find this number that you have right here. If I take 5 and divide it by 2, I get 5 halves. So if you picture what that's going to be, it might help you realize I'm going to take 5 halves and square it. So I have 5 squared is 25, and 2 squared is 4. So if I add 25 over 4 right there, I am going to subtract 25 over 4 at the end. So all I need to do now is combine 7 and 25 over 4. Well, if I take 7 and try to put it in terms of 4, I would get 28 over 4. So I essentially have 28 over 4 minus 25 over 4, and I am going to get plus 3 over 4, because 28 minus 25 is 3. I am allowed to do that because their denominators are the same. So as a vertex now, I'm going to be at negative 5 over 2 and positive 3 over 4 as a vertex. There are some problems in your packet that you guys have. These problems are on worksheet 9, I believe. Nope. Worksheet 7, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at it right now. There are 8 problems on worksheet 7 that I would like you guys to try. Now, you need to know how to do this, because when I come back to school, we're going to learn what you do when you have a number out front and how that changes things. So make sure that you guys understand this. Go back, rewind it, read it again, look up other videos if you need some extra help. Come in the morning on Monday, and I will help you guys if you still struggle. But it's actually a really, really important thing that we're going to do. All right? I hope you guys have a good weekend, and I will see you on Monday.